Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. My name is Katie Brown. I'm the gallery director for the Art League of Ocean City, and I'm here with David Simpson, who is one of our resident studio artists and drawing and painting instructors and plein air painter. And he's going to be talking to us tonight about plein air painting, its history, and why Delmarva is such a special place for it. And I know he'll be highlighting some of our Artist Paint OC painters as well. And we are just a couple weeks away from our annual Artist Paint OC event, August 11th through the 15th. 50 artists will be in town painting all around Ocean City and surrounding areas. And so save the date, mark your calendar for Saturday, August 14th from 5 to 8. That'll be your first chance to see all of the work created for the wet paint sale. And if you want to check out the full schedule of events, it's available on our website, artleagueofoceancity.org. Thank you very much. And so, David, if you want to take it away.
Awesome, Katie. Thank you, guys. I mean, honestly, like the stuff, events like this just couldn't happen without you and Rena and everyone there. I mean, you guys work so hard to just keep everything going. So yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction, Katie. Yes, my name is David Simpson. I am originally from Ocean City. I just recently moved out of there, and I live in Parsonsburg now, which is on the east side of Salisbury, because I'm a public school teacher, and next year I'll be teaching in Crisfield at Crisfield High School, which is an exciting transition for me. But I have been a painter and an artist for 20 years now, academically trained. And I'm really excited to do stuff like this. I even was an adjunct briefly, and I did teach an art history course at University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And I just love the history of art, because it really, I think, helps us provide insight as to why certain things like plein air painting are so special. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and begin. There will be a brief point kind of midway through where we'll I'll like open the floor up for any potential questions, and I don't know, I hope everybody really enjoys. So beyond plein OC, interesting take on the title, just right out the gate, just in case, I'm sure everybody is aware, but plein air painting, you know, basically is a French term that means out in open air. It was something that I was familiar with, but had zero experience with during my academic training. I was purely taught how to studio paint, and my first plein air painting was 2011 during the plein air competition. And I think academic training kind of can bring a certain level of confidence to try to, you know, pull off such a feat like that. This is a particular piece I did from about like 5 years ago. And I just thought this was a good opening image, because it kind of gives you the site, it gives you the scene, kind of overcast day like today. And sometimes days like today are at least here anyway, I don't know where everybody is, but when it's overcast, it's kind of difficult, because you really have to kind of search for the colors and really try to pull out information out of the environment that you see. These beginning few slides, we are going to blow through them really fast. Sometimes, you know, in order to understand something a little better and get true insight of what it is, you have to understand basically what it's not. But at the same time, there is a certain equitable, important kind of route to plein air that goes way back in history. So pre-plein air, you got obviously some of the most famous paintings in history here. You got the Mona Lisa on the left, you got a later Rembrandt self-portrait, and then on the right, you have a neoclassicist David painting of Napoleon. These paintings, you know, a lot of times were done from sketches, and then they were quickly sort of developed, or not quickly developed, sorry, they were slowly developed layer by layer. But one small thing that they do kind of connect to in plein air is the fact that they, at some point, would work from life. And normally that was in the end, they would have the subject, if it was a person, pose for them. So that sensibility of working from life to kind of finalize the painting, there is a connection there. So jumping forward, we just covered like 300 years in like 2 minutes. On the left, you have an Ingres painting, 1851. On the right, you have a Delacroix painting, 1830. So Ingres was also a neoclassicist. He studied under David, and they believed that paintings, basically, that is your first take of photorealism. They believed that paintings, and I believe it was Ingres that was quoted saying that no painting should have like any brush marks, which is hard to fathom. Where Delacroix, on the other hand, it's just exploding with brushwork and this certain energy and movement. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. My point here is, this is where in history you have a divergence in style and movement and interest from the artist. Again, contemporary photorealism definitely can transcend and be connected to classicism and even Italian Renaissance, where Delacroix was a part of the Romantic movement. And this is where artists started to kind of disagree in style. And you get a true sense of like energy with the brush in the painting on the right. And that's probably his most famous painting by Delacroix, which is Liberty Leading the People. I'm a huge fan of both of these artists for different reasons. So jumping forward to 1775 to 1851, you have Turner. And Turner really wasn't a plein air painter. However, largely in Turner's paintings, you get the feeling of plein air. And I'm going to get more in depth into what that exactly entails, but you get a sense, again, that the word plein air, it's like out in open air. You get a sense of fresh air, a sense of atmosphere, environment. And in his painting, you frequently have a lot of brushstroke and a lot of movement. And movement is a principle of design, along with many others. Emphasis is another one, largely incorporated in Turner's work too, just by the use of color palette. But it's interesting because for 1775 to 1851, Turner's paintings really have a certain sort of sense of deconstruction or minimalism or abstraction to them that was just unprecedented for the time. I'm a huge fan of Turner, and it reminds me, even though they might not be plein air painting, most of his paintings have that feeling. And that's something that I can oftentimes connect with, because Katie did allude to the fact that I am a plein air painter. However, some of the people that do this competition, do this show, they are legit plein air painters. Some of them, that's all they do. Some of them, that's largely what they do. Me, I do a lot of painting in the studio, honestly. But most of the time, as far as my work goes, I can speak for myself there, you can't really tell much difference between the studio work and the plein air work. And I just always feel like when I look at a Turner painting, I feel like I'm outdoors. Pissarro is kind of like the grandfather of Impressionism. He was the oldest one of the group. He, really sort of got into the movement and got a true sense of painting the outdoors. sometimes you would get these avenue scenes. I don't know if he had an apartment on the busy road or what, but there's a few paintings like this. And again, you get that tremendous sense of atmosphere in Pissarro's work. There's a lot of information in this painting. There's an incredible sense of space. If you really pay attention to the buildings here on the right, they are more diverse in value, which is a art element, which means contrast, like variation between light and dark. They're also more diverse in color. There's not a whole lot of color to them, but the buildings over here on the right, there is more diversity in color, but also in detail, and that gradually fades. Notice they kind of form a wedge, and that gradually fades as it goes back in space, and the color diminishes, the values diminish. And that's really what I refer to as kind of atmospheric perspective. And that's one thing that I love to paint. I love to paint a sense of depth of field. Ansel Adams, the photographer, known for great depth of field. A lot, if anyone is familiar with my work, typically there's a grand sense of space in my work. And that's one of the things I love most about it, giving it that airy quality as it fades back towards, if you have 1 point perspective, and in this case you do in this painting, it's right here, fading back towards the vanishing point. So I pulled that information out of the buildings, but it's happening in everything, even in the buggies and people and everything that's going on in this particular scene. Two very different painters, but I think are good representations of like the impressionistic movement as it was like coming into its time. Just like now, like we go to the museums, we see these famous paintings on the wall. Even these famous painters at this point in time, they saw the work of the old masters, and they saw things, and they said, well, and they looked for things that they wanted to incorporate in their own work. It's like kind of each one teach one in a way. So boom, Impressionism explodes on the scene. It's hard to believe that when Impressionistic sunrise or Impressionist sunrise by Monet was exhibited, when it was painted, it was like basically considered avant-garde and basically abstract. And it was kind of shocking. People didn't know what to make of it as far as the bourgeoisie and the big scene in Paris and the galleries and the shows and stuff. But you get a strong sense of brushstroke in Monet's work. Monet is notorious for separated marks, deliberately separated marks. But he also has a great understanding of light and how to interpret light. This painting was a pinnacle on the left in art history. And what followed after that was a huge movement of Impressionism. Impressionism is one of the key movements directly linked to plein air painting. Because up until that point, people were doing those like old-fashioned kind of sketches, taking the work to the studio and then, layering it, wet on dry, thin layers, not much brushstroke, not much texture. Texture is another art element. And then boom, all of a sudden you have these paintings that people are just kind of improvisationally throwing together. And that's what kind of shocked, like it was kind of rough around the edges. But the reality, and one of the most beautiful aspects, and this is my opinion, and I think it is the opinion of many, is that there's a directness, there's a rawness, and I use that word improvisation to plein air painting, that it's in the moment. And it's like you're trying to capture and crystallize that one moment, that one feeling of air, that one feeling of light. And I forget the river on the right, but Monet painted from that particular bank on the river multiple times. And I have seen 4 or 5 of them in person. And just that, again, the air quality of his work is unprecedented. And Monet, honestly, was the person that I looked to in history. I'm like, wow, he painted this scene over and over and over again. Before seeing that from Monet, I was of the belief like I just had to be all new subjects all the time. I was kind of like how I was academically sort of trained, and it had to be sort of contemporary, intellectual. And there's a certain gift to painting the same venue more than once. You become familiar with the subject, the surroundings, the composition of it, but seeing it a different light and different times of day and different kinds of days, weather-wise, can really benefit a painter in their own personal growth. I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I would hang both of these on my wall if I could afford them. Berthe Morisot, another impressionistic painter. I included her, one, because I think she's one of the best female painters of all time. For 1882, she had an extraordinary gift to give you the essence of the subject. It's almost borderline abstract. And I think that's another pinnacle point behind the plein air experience. You know, I mentioned that improvisation. I mentioned that sort of directness and that rawness of it, and that trying to crystallize that moment. Well, you're painting basically, if you're talking about oil paint, you're painting what's called wet on wet, also known basically as alla prima painting, which, I mean, you literally have to be very decisive in how you're laying down the paint, whether it's thin and you're layering it, or if it's thicker and you're just kind of doing one layer, or like kind of blending it together on the canvas. There's so many different things to talk about there, and I will touch on that a little bit more later. But to be able to really just like capture the feeling of the moment in such a short amount of time, I think Morisot was one of the finest people to ever do that. There's a painting at the Met that you're looking across a canal, and there's a row of buildings, and there's a building with a green door. It's one of my favorite paintings of all time. I should have probably included that in this particular slide. Morisot, coincidentally, was also Manet's sister-in-law. She married Manet's brother. So Renoir, 1840 to 1919. I think one of the strongest points of Renoir, he's not one of my personal favorites, and that's just my personal opinion as far as the impressionistic movement goes, but he gives you that sense of fresh air. There's a delightfulness, I think, that is consistent in his work, whether it's paintings like it is on the left, you know, the luncheon, I think it's like the luncheon party or whatever, and then on the right you have the painting of Claude Monet painting. So new subjects, and this is what this is where I'm going to talk about this. I mean, largely new subjects were a huge thing with Impressionism. And you have to think, during that time, that's when you had the beginning of the infancy of photography. So cropping started to become a big thing. Busier compositions, not just like a silhouette, not just one figure on a pedestal. You started to get away from mythological subjects and religious subjects. And the Impressionists wanted to give you the Impressionists wanted to give you a strong feeling of everyday life, what was happening. And I think that is one of the greatest things about the plein air in OC. Regardless of whether someone is painting like a Bayside scene or painting an acetate or the boardwalk, you get a wonderful sense of like summertime, like Delmarva summertime, from painter to painter, style to style. Both of these paintings, I think, just have an incredible, fresh, airy sensibility to them. Trying to kind of breeze through the history part so we can get into the show itself. Van Gogh, notorious for making multiple paintings a day. I mean, he obviously, at this point, I think it's pretty much historically proven that he had some type of mental illness, but he was obsessive in his painting. I think what Van Gogh brings to the table is an incredible sense of movement, which also relates to his ability to establish composition. He also painted pretty thick, typically in one layer. If you've ever looked at a Van Gogh up close, you can frequently see raw canvas somewhere kind of integrated throughout the picture. And then boom, you got all this thick paint, and it's really individualized brushstrokes. I mean, a lot of people are familiar with Van Gogh, and that, I think, is unprecedented compared to most people in history. And I think that's really what made Van Gogh so just uniquely special. But with that sense of brushstroke, you obviously are getting a diversity of texture. Texture, again, is an art element. You also are getting a strong sense of line, and line is probably the most fundamental art element, probably my favorite, if not color. So I could probably do a whole lecture on Cezanne, because Cezanne was the next pinnacle. I talked about like sort of Eng and Delacroix being a divergence in art history, and Delacroix really encouraged the use of brushstroke and movement and dynamic and emotional quality in the painting. Cezanne really set the table for the Cubists and the Fauvists, but he was an incredible painter himself and an incredible plein air painter. I think what the Faubs took from Cezanne was directly out of his landscape painting. And he was extraordinary, I think, at two things beyond his compositions. And one, it was his ability to put shapes together like a puzzle piece, like puzzle pieces, putting together a puzzle, and then his use of color. And that's why I specifically chose this particular painting. I mean, who would think to basically paint a mountainside like with peaches and yellows and a little bit of blue and some light violets and yellows. There's just all sorts of color exploding in this. And that's what the Faubs took from him. But his sort of interpretation, I think, in plein air painting in that regard, how he assembled his shapes together and created this visual movement throughout his composition. Atop, the icing on that, again, the color, just absolutely incredible. I love looking at his landscape paintings. They're as far as his work goes, it's my favorite. So recapping, just on the sort of constructs of what plein air is. Venturing into the outdoors, and it seems so simple, but really up until the Impressionists, that's not really what people did. People painted in, indoors, and they painted like more or less from a studio. Painting nature in natural light. Plein air painters will tell you that the best time of the day is to paint, basically. So let's talk, like, just for summer's sake, because it's summertime now, you know, first light is like 5:45. So basically 5:45 to like probably about 9:30, 10 a.m. at the latest. And then coupled with that, equally valuable in sort of summer standards, you know, you're talking probably that 7 o'clock to, I mean, nocturnes are, you can paint all night, but when you're in the middle of a competition like Ocean City, I doubt people are out there painting at midnight. I mean, I'm sure it's happened, but it's very rare. But why is that? Because the angle of the sun, you just have a certain qualitative light experience there during those time frames. And you tend to have more hues to pull from. And because the light is at a better angle, you tend to have more sweeping shadows. You tend to have shadows with more color. And thus, you know, that natural light during those times is just phenomenal. And it can be overwhelming, you know, leading into the next point there, new subjects and the essence. You know, you're standing out there, okay, Van Gogh, and this, I just randomly chose this picture for this particular slide. Van Gogh's out there and he's got, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, 11, 12, like there's probably like 20 people in this picture, plus a horse and buggy. And it's like, okay, well, where's my focal point going to be? I mean, there's a lot of information in front of you. A lot of artists use viewfinders, but to pick and choose what you want the feature of your subject to be. But the feeling of new subjects in history, that was, I think, a breath of fresh air historically, especially, you know, studying art history, you know, contrasting that with Italian Renaissance, like you have like, you know, 30 some odd paintings in a row of Madonna and Child or the Affirmation or whatever. And you don't really get that with plein air. I mean, yes, again, some artists would recreate a certain scene over and over, but it's just like a fresh look all the time. And then that essence of the subject. Now, some artists go beyond that. I mean, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit as well. But most, you know, mostly plein air, you know, talking the sort of general parameters of it, most artists, they're going for the essence of that moment, that feeling, that experience. And then new painting applications. You know, I kind of touched on that. I'm going to touch on that more when I talk about process. And then improvisation. That was the coolest thing for me. Leaving the studio for that first time, 2011, I did one large plein air painting. Had no idea what I was getting myself into. I did one, I sold it, and I was like, hey, I'm going to do this again. I've done the show 10 years in a row, and the improvisational feeling that you get from it. And that's even magnified, say, on Sunday with the quick paint or the Art X quick paint. I mean, you're really, that's like watching improv or listening to improvisational jazz. Like you kind of got to fasten your seatbelt, you know. So kind of nearing the midway point, this sort of mimics some of what that last slide just talked about. So why is Delmarva and OC so great? And you know, beyond plein air Ocean City, I mean, Delmarva holds arguably the nation's largest the most prestigious plein air event in plein air Easton, which just ended a few weeks ago. But you know, why is Delmarva so spectacular? Again, it's just incredible natural light. You know, for someone who frequents the beach at first light, Just sometimes, I mean, what you can see at first light, at sundown, and depending on the venue, it doesn't matter if it's, you know, say geometrically based like the boardwalk, or if it's organically based like this particular painting of mine that I did at 78th Street on the Bayside. It's, you know, the light is just incredible. And then, you know, a good plein air artist, it helps to have that good natural light to pull out those colors and give you that color. But a real good plein air artist might have to search some. And I mean, it took me a little bit to kind of figure that out. And honestly, I still struggle with that at times, like on an overcast day, trying to articulate the color palette of the entire said painting. And it always seems like when you're searching, there's one or two things where you're like, well, what color should I go with here? And how dark, what value should I make it? And sometimes you have to kind of like scratch it and scrape it off and start again. But the color that Delmarva brings, I mean, just if you're from here and you pay attention to the Bayside, like just taking this scene alone, that marsh will change color throughout the season. And it will really start in September, and just this one scene alone, the dynamics of how that scene will progress throughout the seasons is absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. I mean, we are just inundated with incredible nature here, which translates really well in the plein air painting. But again, it doesn't have to be just about nature. What about the space and perspective? You know, I mean, you just have places that you can see forever, but then you also have incredible shallow spaces as well. Say like somewhere on the boardwalk, like the end of the boardwalk, you know, near the museum, like you have, you know, the museum itself, like you can have some incredible shallow spaces as well in this area. But the diversity, I mean, just look at Ocean City in and of itself. Forget anywhere else on Delmarva, because, you know, this talk is leading up towards the show. I mean, again, I can't harp on that enough. You can't get any different, say, from downtown boardwalk or like the amusement rides from a scene like this, you know, that has almost zero architecture in it, very little architecture. And then you have everything in between, where you have some that are kind of equal parts. I've seen so many cool perspectives throughout the last 10 years painting. It's amazing the caliber of vision that our artists that frequent this show, that the subjects they choose. It's just absolutely incredible. And then you do have some really good history and kind of nostalgia, like I mentioned the museum earlier, and there's some spots and venues that are, you know, quite notorious and easily recognizable. So with that being said, I'm going to stop the share screen for a moment. Does anybody have any questions, or, you know, want to say anything before I continue on? The next part of the thing, I'm going to start talking a little bit about technique and application, and then largely focus on the art show itself. So are we good? I'll be providing an opportunity for questions again at the end of the talk as well. So all right, so technique and process. This is I think one of the few, I should document the progression of making a painting more often than I do. I just get caught up in the moment, to be honest with you. And this is kind of outdated because I don't paint on white canvas anymore. This is 2013. This was actually a painting from Paint Berlin back when I was doing that. I wish I could still do it at another wonderful local event. It's just really hard for me given that it's like the second week of school opening back up. But I just put these images up more for inspiration. You know, I could talk to you at length about technique and process. I mean, some people do watercolor and they pencil it in and you know, layer the paint kind of thinner and do wet on wet technique and watercolor, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But sometimes you know, it's wet on dry with watercolor. Acrylic's kind of interesting. You probably, especially in August, need some kind of slow drying medium or your paint's gonna like literally dry as you're putting it out of the tube on your palette. And I think that's why in the summertime, like it's kind of trickier for acrylic. But acrylic, you're pretty much forced to work, you know, wet on dry, which means that the paint that you previously put down is dry. And then you have, you know, you're putting down fresh new paint on top of that. Me personally, I now prime, unless I'm doing a nocturne, I'll mix up some sort of midnight kind of Prussian blue color, but I largely paint on cadmium orange. I like the brightness of it. I think it really sort of warms the whole painting up. And in thinner moments, that's where that's happening because maybe the paint's a bit transparent. It kind of shows through and it kind of, I think, gives the whole canvas a certain kind of energy. But largely what happens is, you know, more speaking to the common viewer or novice painter, you know, a lot of times artists will kind of sketch in. You know, some people use charcoal, most people use paint. I use kind of like a gray color, even on the orange, like a whitish gray. And it's, you know, you draw in, basically drawing is the predecessor of painting, and you kind of sketch and draw your subject in place and where you want it. And then from there, you know, you start developing your picture. I personally prefer to work back to front. This is a rare example where I had a key featured subject kind of like pinpointed in the painting. And I decided to really develop that first and then slowly work around the barn and sort of farm information. But I'm also kind of unique in the fact too that I roll out there with kind of a variation of my studio setup. And I roll out there with a big palette and I do a lot of premeditative mixing personally. So like I mix a lot on the palette and then lay it down on the canvas. A lot of painters go out into, you know, open air with what's called a French easel. And a lot of painters are using a palette that is maybe 6 by 8 inches. So it's not like you can do a bunch of mixing in front of you on there. Or if you're, you know, again, if you're working in acrylic, you're like one color at a time, you know? So in that way, it's interesting. Like a lot of people think, oh, it's just plein air painting, but there's so many variants to it and such variety in visions of choosing compositions and subjects and perspectives and vanishing points to the techniques themselves. You know, back to the underpainting, I mentioned that I paint on orange. I've seen people do neutral gray. I've seen people do Naples yellow. I've seen people do pink. I've seen people paint on black. And I think there's a certain ambiance and feeling and sentimental quality to all those underpainting approaches, and also, you know, the different techniques. A lot of plein air painters like to use bristle brushes. I personally, myself, I like synthetic brushes, which are, you know, they're not as soft as a sable, but they're softer than a bristle. And in my older synthetic brushes give you more of a textured feel like a bristle brush. But as this painting kind of alludes to, I largely paint in palette knife. In this particular painting, maybe the farm trim, like the structural information of the building itself was probably the only thing that was painted with a brush and my signature. Beyond that, everything else was painted with a palette knife. I probably own like 25 palette knives. I personally like the ones that are kind of have the pie serving kind of shape to them with the rounded edge, pointed edge. I used to have one with a pointed edge and I ended up poking a hole in my painting. But I progressively taught myself how to paint better and get better as an artist with the palette knife in the studio at first, but largely outdoors. I like the texture it brings. I like that sort of swatchiness that it brings. It gives you this subtle feel of like kind of a Cezanne-like effect going on with the shapes that are happening and like that sort of swatchiness in the colors. It's really important to me. Color is one of my favorite art elements personally, and I'm still learning and growing, but I feel like I'm really starting to get a good grasp on understanding not only color and value, and that wasn't always the case. I mean, just take this particular painting alone, you probably have 12 to 15 maybe different greens in this painting. So yeah, process and technique, you know, it's not just a painting, and everybody has so many different styles. And if there's any viewer who sees this or any patron who, please, you know, don't take it at face value, you know, don't take it at face value. Artists want to talk about their work, you know, they get excited. We get excited. At least I do. I'll speak for myself. And I pretty much could speak for most ever, you know, that we get excited when a viewer looks at the work, admires it, but then appreciates things that are technically happening in it. And that's not too often. But that is one of the camaraderies of like an event like this, talking with your fellow artists. And there's nothing like getting a compliment from someone that you have strong, you know, rapport with and have the utmost respect for. I just wanted to, whoa, I got some water on my mouse. Sorry, I jumped back. I just wanted to throw this out there to give you a sense of the feeling of the scene when I showed up. This was 2 years ago. Ironically, and I was honored with the opportunity to receive Best Nocturne with a painting at first light. I got there at like 4:30 something. It was so humid that the condensation was building on my palette before I even started painting. But I thought this was pretty cool to show you the scene itself. And on the right outside of this photo on the left here, right outside of this photo on the left, you had another cloud coming in to the right. And, you know, earlier I mentioned space and talked about all this space in front of you, all this stuff and information and how to make sense of it all. Sometimes it helps. Like I pulled those clouds over from the left, kind of squeezed them into the picture, pulled the clouds over from the right. It was like I kind of cut the picture and sandwiched it together, like as far as composition, to get the sky that I created in this particular painting on the right. You know, back to process just real quick. The skyline, largely done with brush, the rest of the painting exclusively palette knife. So let's start talking about the OC Planner event details. When's it happening? Real soon. Wednesday, August 11th, 8 a.m. I tried to get first check-in. Somebody beat me to the punch, but I'll be checking in at 8:10, Katie. So I'll be there at 8:10 to check in, and I'll probably do a little warm-up painting somewhere, and that's, I think, a lot of artists, they'll either kind of do a little warm-up painting because they're already kind of getting to that mid-morning point, or some of your nostalgically patient painters will go like scope out, and drive around and look and kind of plan. I have the luxury that, I know the town of Ocean City like the back of my hand. So I kind of already know going in what I'm personally going to paint. But yeah, it kicks off then at 8 a.m. basically on August 11th, and it runs through the 14th. So what can you expect? You can expect 40 plus artists painting outdoors in Ocean City and Assateague, or it can be of Ocean City. It can also be of the West Ocean City Harbor. So when I say of Ocean City, it can be like across the bay looking towards Ocean City. That's there's some very good venues. My old neighborhood where I grew up, I've painted there a lot. Saturday, August 14th, 5 to 8 p.m. Free admission wet paint sale and the award ceremony. And man, the Art League and their sponsors, it's something else. A few years ago, when I was kind of getting a feel for it, like I had so many artists like say, "Oh, yeah, it's cool, like it's awesome to win an award, but really I want to sell my painting." And I think that is still 100% true. But when first place, I think it's I don't want to misquote here, but I think first place now is like $2,000. That's nothing to shake a stick at. I mean, it kind of raises the stakes a little bit. I mean, it's not that you're going in thinking I'm going to try to win, but there's real prize money. And that's the point I'm making. And I think it adds to the excitement, not just for the painters, but for the outcome and for the viewers and the show itself. I always feel like it's in terms of painting, it's the best show that the Art Center, I think, or one of the top 3 that the Art Center puts on every year, without a doubt. And you get the chance to meet the artist. That's super cool. So yeah, that is happening again on Saturday, August 14th from 5 to 8. Sunday, any artist who isn't completely fried still has pep and step. I normally do the Sunday event. It really depends on how exhausted I am from the main event or weather depending. But it's super cool, the quick paint. It's a bit stressful for me personally. Some artists, it's amazing. It's like, you did that in 2 hours. I mean, are you sure you weren't here all day? Some artists are just so gifted like that. But the quick paint, it's super cool. You got a limited area. You're like racing against the clock. And then everybody takes it back up to the Art Center. The judging, I think, happens somewhere in like around that 12 p.m. window. But boom, then you got the off-easel sale 1 to 3. I've never placed in the quick paint. However, I have sold over half of my quick paints at the show, and I have sold all my quick paint paintings. I don't think I own a single one still. I think I sold the last one this past winter at the gallery. But it's a pretty cool take on downtown. So further details, the show is up at the Art Center August 15th to September 25th. It is a juried show. Allison Lee Mankey. When I first met her, she was really kind of building a name for herself. I mean, for how young she is, it's incredible the magnitude of accomplishments and accolades that she has already gained for herself. She is a phenomenal professional painter who largely does plein air painting and travels the country. I mean, the amount of awards she probably won like last year or the year before, it's probably more than I'll win in my lifetime. Phenomenal human being too, just super humble and very nice, great person to talk to. So if you come to the event, talk to her, maybe, pick her brain a little bit as to why she chose the painting she chose. She certainly will give you the time of day. Is a really good person to have judged the event, and she's competed in it many times before. So ArtX is popping off on August 21st, 22nd. That is the big art festival at Northside Park, kind of mid-end of August. The Art Center has done an incredible job of sort of building the plein air experience there. Like for the last few years, several years, they've been featuring like one painting from each artist in the main event in their big booth by the bridge on the pond. But now we got a quick paint contest included in this, and I hope I can make it to this. The quick paint, I believe it's on the 22nd. I have that on a later slide. But that's an incredible experience to see, not only the work there, but to see so much art, so much different kinds of art at ArtX. But I'll be talking more about the quick paint contests there. So let's move into some here and nows. Before I begin, I just want to say that the people that I have selected, it's not like I'm like, oh, these are the best people in the show. No, not by any means. These are people that I either am friends with, good acquaintances with, or just connected on the good old FB, Facebook. But Jim Rahak, I do value as a personal friend of mine. I mean, when you're doing caricatures for my wedding, that was a paid event, but when you're doing caricatures for my wedding and, I wanted you to be there for part of that experience, yes, you're an important person in my life, but it goes well beyond that. Him and I showed together at Area Art Gallery in Rehoboth, and Jim really was like the final touches of my education. He really enlightened me on how to articulate natural light and transition it into color in a painting. The painting on the left largely speaks volumes to that. I think Jim is one of the best masters in the local area of giving you shadows, and especially shadows on the beach. This is a particular painting of, I think this was a Delaware painting. It's up by the Cape. It's just absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, I got to watch him make caricatures there in Rehoboth, and we got to know each other, and just an incredible human being. If you're at the show, definitely somebody worth checking out their work and worth talking to 100%. The painting on the right is a plein air painting of Ocean City a few years back. Again, that atmospheric quality here. But one thing I think beyond the understanding of color that Jim does incredibly well is his use to take the brush and direct the viewer through the composition, giving you that textural movement. It's kind of like a touch of, it's a softer version of like Van Gogh, or like a touch of Cezanne, maybe somewhere a little bit of both kind of sprinkled in there. There's always this sentimental quality to Jim's surfaces, and some areas are very, very thin. These shaded areas and these rocks, super thin paint there, but it's really built up in some places. But Jim is definitely notorious for delivering the essence of a subject. Maggie, another wonderful person, and that's the thing too. I mean, so not everybody is, but there's so many artists and painters that are a part of, just out there in this world, and they just have such a wonderful, I think, personality. And our plein air event speaks volumes to that. So Maggie is from Easton. You know, she gives you, I think, a really interesting take on a color palette. You got a lot of muted stuff, a lot of straightforward color, but then boom, there's like these moments of color or moments of light, these little sort of, you know, reflections on the water, or the way she just hits that umbrella in the painting on the right. It's just truly incredible. The color of the shadows underneath the umbrellas here, it's sort of a blue violet, but then it transitions out of the light with a little touch of red violet, and the impressions of the people and this little girl running. I mean, there's a certain sentimental quality to Maggie's work that every time I see her work, I'm just like, I kind of feel like I'm at home, you know. And since I grew up in Ocean City, it really makes me feel like I'm at home. This vantage point underneath the pier on the left was last year's second place winner. Very straightforward palette again. You know, maybe it was the middle of the day, who knows, but it's just an incredible sense of light. She nailed that window, and I've painted this before, that window, and that how she split the sky and the sea there in that window. That's a nice, I think, intellectual moment that she most likely, I'm going to give her credit, that she chose to create there. Christopher Best, became friends with him and Maggie both only through the Ocean City plein air event. You know, Chris gives you a little more expressionism. You know, he's delivering like this sort of real rawness to it, and direct painting application, and heavier brush marks, and really sometimes really big, strong brush mark. And it's so interesting because he's like the chillest guy ever. You feel like somebody like really bold, like personality would be painting, and he's like the, you know, the super soft spoken, real nice, humble guy. Last year he won best use of light, I believe, and he's won the show before. I didn't mention that about Jim. Jim's placed many times as well. But I love the energy that Chris brings to the table. It's very direct. You get a sense that, like, you know, you should be looking at his work. His work kind of, it demands attention. You know, you put it on the wall, and it's saying, look at me. The painting on the left, I really like the perspective. The painting on the right, I really like the movement. I mean, he even captured that dog, the silhouette of the dog, just like running, like kind of as if he's about to leap. Ann Schaefer, one of the nicest ladies you'll ever meet. I first had decided I needed to meet Ann Schaefer when I saw this rainy painting she did during the Paint Berlin. I had to find out who this person was, because I thought it was at the time, was one of the best plein air paintings I've ever seen. Here's two paintings from previous Paint OC events. You know, she's a little looser, a little softer, and I think that is a testament to the quality of her character. She regularly will give you a nice balanced kind of color palette. A very good take, I think, on perspective and scenery. These two paintings couldn't be any more different. These trees are uptown, like kind of back streets somewhere. Very, very, and I know where this is. There's like I think there's some stores down here to the left. This is like, yeah, because that's 9th Street, out the building there, the bathroom house. So yeah, this is like 6th, 7th Street. There's like some stores down here, I think. This, I like the freshness of how she paints. There's not a ton of texture, but she gives you some stroke, and you get a certain textural feeling, much different than you would see like in Chris's painting. Both of these paintings is absolutely beautiful. Ray Ewing. I met Ray Ewing. I put him up before I sold my house in West Ocean City. It was last summer I was there, or the second to last summer I was there, and they were like, we need someone to place for someone that's a frequent thing with the show, putting up artists. And I put Ray up on short notice, and I'm glad I did. The man is mid-Atlantic renowned painter, incredible personality as well. I think every year since he's started doing the show, I think every year, maybe except for 1 year, he's placed in the top 3, but I'm pretty certain he's placed in top 3. I mean, he's a impeccable painter. Luckily for him, he got the inclusion of 3 artworks here just because of the composition of these 2 here on the right. Ray's color palettes are really interesting. He gives you these like muted, kind of toned down look, and then boom, you get this moment of light, this moment of color. Ray has a good feel for where he wants you to look in the painting. With that being said, you also have very thin paint, but a good sense of texture. Similar but different to Ann Schaefer. You know, it's not, the paint's typically not that thick. Now, obviously here in the Whitewater on the right, it is, but the paintings are pretty thin, but he manages to give you some nice painterly texture. I love how the light's hitting these people in the middle picture there. Just really gorgeous work. Frequently sells most of his work at the show too. And he's a good storyteller. So another great person to talk to. Had the real pleasure of meeting John. I hope I pronounced this right. Eisman apparently doesn't live too far from me. He came up to me and looked at my painting last year. First time I met him last year. And he said, man, you nailed this skyline. And I turned around, I didn't know who he was. We started talking. And then by the time I'd packed up, he'd already got his underpainting done for this painting on the left. And that's why I incorporated. I saw the beginning stages of this. Going back to the process comment, John does his sketch in color, in acrylic, really loose. And then it dries so fast that once it dries, he paints right over top of it in oil. John gives you this incredible sense of color, wonderful use of pastels, and it's very impressionistic. It is very impressionistic. It really reminds me, you know, of painting a few of the paintings, a few of the people that I showed earlier in this presentation, you know, some of the most famous people in history. I feel like he's right there sort of, you know, in the same kind of technical genre as like Monet. The way he puts down brushstrokes and gives you that airy feeling and that light, just absolutely incredible. This painting on the left, this is Ocean City over here to the left. There's little glimmers of light down there. The balance of warm and cool in the color palette, just really nice. West Ocean City Harbor, right around the corner from my old neighborhood. I love the movement in the sky here. I think that really sort of suppresses and frames the main subjects. Very good. I'll be looking forward to seeing him again. So I'll throw in a couple of mine from my two of my favorites from last year. This is the painting on the left that I mentioned that John made comments about. It was super overcast again. I got there like first light and it was kind of gray and cloudy, kind of like today. But then there was like 15 minutes where the light just blew, the clouds kind of broke and the light just blew through and just lit up the sky gold. And then that's that 15 minutes that I made this painting from. And, you know, I mentioned kind of in Cezanne, you know, not comparing myself to him, but taking something from him. Frequently when I do buildings, I pieced them together using geometric shapes to really kind of piece it together to kind of put that horizon line puzzle together. But then I tried to unify that, and unity is a principle of design, you know, using similar kind of stroke down here in the foreground to try to have that swatches and that sort of feeling of shapes to kind of balance that horizon line out. The painting on the right, I just chose to paint this because this tree was barely, I mean, it was dead, but it's hanging in there. And I titled this painting Resilience. I struggled with the color and value of this. It was darker and like greener, and then I lightened it up and cooled it down as the final touch of this painting. Both of these paintings can be seen in person at the gallery in my studio there. So before I move on, I just want to reiterate those people, just personal acquaintances of mine that I reached out to and said, hey, would you like to be a part of this event? By no means do I think, you know, they're better than anyone else in this listing of people. I have seen incredible paintings from so many people on this list, but I also see some new names. And I'm going to try to roll through these really fast. If I butcher somebody's name, linguistics is not my forte, but Carol Aberbach, Lisa Abrams, and a few people that I am familiar with. I will throw in some tidbits here and there. Lisa Abrams is an awesome painter, very articulated. Bruno Barron, very renowned painter, Western Shore, Maryland, Mid-Atlantic Painting Association. He is a multi-award winner. Judy Benton, awesome person, know her real well. Very diverse painter. Mentioned Chris Bess already. Deborah Cole, Eric DeHart, super awesome. She's a very diverse artist as well. She mostly, I think, largely does murals, if I remember correctly. Vlad Duchev, Baltimore, Maryland. And that's one thing too, pay attention to, you know, the variety of locations. Obviously you're going to get a lot of Maryland and Delaware, but even there, it's not like it's all Ocean City. It's not like it's all like the Tri-County area. Most of these people don't even live here. You know, Sabayan Dugan, Lewis, Sydney Edwards, New York. Good luck to you and your travels down here, and I hope you have a good event. John Eisman, just mentioned him. Ray Ewing, Nancy Fine, Rhonda Ford, Jerry Gaskell also shares she's got a studio at the Art Center and is a big time part. Huge teacher, educator there, is doing the show. I love the whimsy in her work. Her work just is always so fun to look at. Incredible watercolor painter. Jill Glassman has won awards as well. Frequently you can see her painting on a black underpainting. Incredible sense of you know, balancing the color against the contrast there. Liz Hackney, Kathy Homans, Kathy Hugel, Casey Rajender, Barbara Kern Bush, seen her work, very loose painter, as an award winner in the show. Bonnie McCowan, Catherine Miller, Crystal Mall, former first place winner. Very muted palette, but subtle use of color, very tight paintings, almost pushing that photorealistic kind of like strong sense of realism in her work. It's very just amazing that she can get that much detail into a plein air painting. Jose Ramirez, first timer last year, won third place. Jim Rehack, multi-award winner. Al Richards, Stacy Rogers, big winner last year. Greg Rosner, Karen Ruberry, Maggie Safardi, which I mentioned earlier. Stacy Sass does the show. has done the show numerous times. This is a picture of Maggie here on the right. The last one was Stacy. And Schaefer, John Schisler, unique take, friend of mine, brings photorealism to the plein air table. And it's impressive in what he is accomplishing in doing so. That is not an easy feat. Ricky's here, is glad to see him back. He, like myself, is an educator, 10 months out of the year, and very textured paintings. I really like his work. Awesome guy. Blanche Servin, myself, Erica Spade, Barbara Stepura, wonderful person, has been doing the show a really long time. Great painter, and has won awards. Sarah Ciarto, Nancy Thomas, Casey Unger, Maureen Wheatley, saw you on the call. Glad you're coming back. I've seen your paintings, great painter, and it's good to see you doing the show again. Cheryl Wisbach, know her quite well. She won the show maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Jackie Yaman, awesome person. I'm familiar with her work as well. Great painter. And Valentina Yanati, wow, New York. Good luck in your travels as well. Lori Yates, great painter, has done the show. And last but not least, Dennis Young, arguably one of the top quick paint painters. He's won many awards over the last several years, and he's super fun to talk to. He will give you a lot of information in his painting. So those are the artists. Again, if I messed up anybody's name, I greatly apologize. Linguistics is not my forte. I just wanted to try to bring recognition to all parties. Painting time. Again, I kind of hit on this. You know, it's 8 a.m. to about 8 a.m. Wednesday to about 10 a.m. on Saturday, because we all got to be there by like 10 or 11 at the latest to hang the work. Where to look? You know, people are always like, Laura, where are you going to be painting? It's kind of like catching lightning in a bottle, really. I mean, they got a map and stuff, and I'm kind of getting off track, but like, if you want to see people painting, there's a few ways to increase your chances, basically. You know, stay connected on the FB and the OC plein air page. You know, that like, oh, they're there. Like, if you're out looking and somebody's painting, you might be able, maybe you're a couple streets away, you can go catch them. You know, it's also a good way to keep up on, like, you know, on your artist friends too, speaking to the artists themselves. You know, like maybe like you want to run into somebody and you might be able to find out where they are. But there's also a map. They put up a map that kind of helps some, but honestly, I think the FB is the biggest one. You know, but again, your prime times, because of the lighting, and I kind of stretched it a little here, I would really say, you know, a lot of your painters are painting between that 7 to 11 a.m. window. Most likely, you know, weather depending, you'll catch me like first light somewhere in the 60-something street. I'm going to try to hit up a sunrise painting this year, a large sunrise in the 60-somethings, weather depending, Thursday or Friday, maybe even both. I like to paint more in the morning. I try to avoid the circus in the evening myself. But your primes, you know, prime spots that you might be able to catch some people kind of on the regular: Northside Park, West OC Harbor, and the boardwalk area, of course. You know, those might be some spots where you could just cruise during the main event times between, you know, that Wednesday to Saturday morning time and catch some painters working. But do you really want to witness, you know, someone painting? Without a doubt, the quick paint is the best opportunity to see that, you know, see people working in action. Now, during that time, depending on who you are, I get a little stressed out, so I have trouble talking to people. Like, it's hard for me to make a finished product in 2 hours, personally. Not that people won't talk to you, not that I won't, but it you know, it is a little harder, you know, because you're literally racing against the clock. But you can see a whole lot of people in basically, I would say, a mile circumference. You know, 3 blocks this way, 3 blocks that way, 3 blocks this way. You know, it's all happening. and the nucleus is there at dumpsters, like the ice cream shop on the boardwalk. But it's all in that area. And then that's from 9 to 11. And then the wet paint sale again is 1 to 3. But Art X quick paint competition this year, August 22nd. The whole event is like 9 to 3 p.m. But you want to see the people paint? Be there 10 to 12. Judging's like 12:30, I believe. And then the wet paint sale there at Art X is 1 to 3. How cool is it? It was a unique experience to sell my first quick paint painting. It's like the painting's soaking wet. And you're like, okay, be careful with this, taking it home. It's just, I don't know. It's super cool to see everybody paint. Like one year I actually didn't paint, and that was the year that the mega life rescue thing, I rode my bike in just to watch my cohort like paint. I wanted to see everybody else painting and not have the stress of, because I was really kind of just depleted from the main event that year. I went big that year with many paintings and kind of just ran myself into the ground. And that's, I've even been the spectator, and it's super cool to see. So I just wanted to throw this out there. If anyone, not that you have to, or not that I encourage you to, but if you are interested in seeing more of my personal work, I do have 40 plus paintings in Studio D at the Art Center. But it's maybe after watching this, you can go look at some of them, and you might see them in a different light. This venue, this scene here in this particular painting, this painting is there. This was a plein air. I'd be okay if I don't sell this painting. I mean, I would like to, but you always want to sell them, but I'd be okay because that particular year, 3 years ago, had some sentimental quality to me. I sold my house that I grew up in, which was less than a half mile from here. In that particular year, I painted largely at this location exclusively for that reason, because I knew I was moving and selling the house I grew up in. But it's just another example of that sort of synthesis between organic and geometric and man-made and architecture, and just the views and colors that our wonderful area has to offer. So thank you very much. These are 2 other plein air paintings that I've done. That the tiny one on the left of the inlet jetty is up at the gallery. Currently the painting on the right is hanging in my living room. But they have been done. I just included them because they were a part of the plein air as well. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Does anybody want to throw anything out there? I mean, you can put them in the chat box, maybe unmute yourself.
I just want to say thank you, David.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Angela.
It's been really fun.
Thank you.
And inspiring.
Well, that's thank you for that comment. That's the point. I whether it was for the artist, or for the general public, that was my point in talking to Katie about this and trying to put this out there. And the fact that we could do it online and really record it was probably better, because if anyone missed it, or they can see it after the fact. And that was the root of the point, to inspire, whether it's patrons, artists, novice artists, that was the whole point of it. So thank you for that.
Are you talking to Barbara?
I'm unmuted. It's Emily. And I just think you spoke beautifully about what plein air is and what it can, how different some of the things that people paint, even your own paintings, are so diverse. And I think that's, I think you really described plein air beautifully.
Thank you, Emily. That was, I mean, yeah, that was the one thing that took me by surprise. Was the vantage points. I mean, Ray Ewing, you know, just to cite him again because I know him, but I've seen many others throughout the years, like give you a painting that you're kind of looking at a shallow space, like down like at a dune, and there's like no sky. You know, you almost want to like synthetically think like, oh, like it's a plein air painting, you should have sky in it. But like I've seen so many paintings throughout the years, like kind of like looking down like at the foothill of a dune or like a bike rack, and then you got almost no sky or some limited sky. But the shallow space ones, those are the ones that really kind of surprise me. I'm like, man, why don't I think of that? You know, like, but yeah, it's so cool to see all the different renditions. And I mean, at this point, Emily, and you do such a good job helping with the event and really running it and all that. I mean, even you, like you've seen, let's say you've probably seen over 100 paintings of the boardwalk at this point, and it doesn't get old, you know, it doesn't get old. Anybody else?
David, it's Claire. How long have you all been doing this? It's been sponsored.
So my first year, I think it happened maybe a year or two before I came into the picture. My first year was 2011. Katie or Emily would know the direct answer to that. Was it 2010?
Wow, that's great.
I don't know exactly when plein air began. I do know that it was a smaller event down in Ocean City until 2013 when we opened our current building. And I've been involved since then. And it just has been evolved from a little bitty thing to a big thing.
And well, you're a big part of that. Not to, you know, toot your horn, but you are a big part of that. And I experienced that. You know, I did start it. I mean, again, I did it in 2011, and it was right off the easel there on Somerset Ave, and it's really evolved and come into something that I think is more recognizable, you know, as far as like the mid-Atlantic area. I mean, when you have people that are willing to travel from New York, and you have people from the Western Shore who come back every year. When the last time I got third place, and I looked down the line, and I got third place. I've gotten third place twice, but the last time I got third place, I look down the line and I see Jim Rahak and Dennis Young, Ray Ewing, and Barbara Stepura beside me. That's when I knew. I was like, wow, like I'm doing something right. Like these are multi-award winning painters. And, you know, if I wasn't a school teacher, man, I would do a whole lot more plein air painting. I would do I wish I had the time. And some of those people like Jim, like that's exclusively what he does. He does not paint in the studio. I mean, it's admirable that he marches out there in the snow and makes a painting right there in the snow. Yeah, you have some seriously professional, creditable people doing the event. It's just an honor to be a part of it.
I would think it's the 16th year for it. This year is the 16th annual. Yeah. So, but I think you're right that it doesn't get old. Even the same scenes, there's new life brought to it, depending on who the artist is and the time of day and the year. And so it's really incredible.
Yeah, and you guys, you know, added the quick paint, and then now you added the, the Art X exhibition. Then you added the Art X, quick paint. I mean, it's really something. It really is. But just seeing all of that work together on the wall and knowing that it's been made literally in 2 to 3 days, I'm hopefully not going to kill myself. I'm going to do it 18 by 24, which I think is like the max size. If I could go bigger, I probably would. But, I'm thinking about doing an 18 by 24, maybe 2 this year.
Well, that would be
Can't wait
interesting
to
to see from you.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I've been kind of toying with the idea, and that's why I wish I had more time to like get out there and plein air paint. I'm kind of toying with the idea of maybe changing it up, like style wise, and deviating from what I know, but it's easy to fall right back into like your comfort zone, how do you break the mold without pushing it? So I don't know, we'll see. If it maybe not this year, maybe next year, but I'm considering deviating off the path. Anyone else?
Why don't you do one of each? One traditional and one breaking the mold.
I could just, if it doesn't go well, just scrap it. But anybody else got any comments or questions or anything? We're good.
Well, David, thank you so much. I think you captured the energy of the event really well, and I'm excited. I can't wait for it. So
Yeah, it'll be a good time one way or another, So,
I agree.
and thank you guys for the opportunity to give the presentation. And thanks for everybody for joining us this evening, or anyone who watches it after the fact. So
Thank you, David.
It was great.
thank you.